Hello, I'm Michael Topham, technical writer for Digital Photo. Welcome to this month's Photoshop Masterclass video lesson that's going to be studying the 6th transform tool in the transform tools list, which is the powerful warp tool. Introduced into Photoshop CS2, it is featured in both Photoshop CS3 and Photoshop CS4 and is an excellent tool to turn to when we need to rearrange the shape of our images or the shape of a specific area in an image. We'll be looking at the main advantages of using the tool shortly, but for now let's take a look at it in its basic form and understand how to go about selecting it and using it. On the CD you'll find a file called warpexperiment.jpg, and that's the document that I currently have up on my screen. And if you fancy loading it up to give the warp tool a try for yourself, you'll find it in the Start Images folder. If I head up to Edit in the menu bar and then scroll down to Transform, you'll be able to see that I can't actually access the Transform tools to select the Warp tool. And the reason for this is that I need to make a selection of the document first. The quickest way to select the entire document is by hitting Ctrl and A, and that will load up the marching ants. If I go up to Edit in the menu bar and then go down to Transform, you'll be able to see that we now have access to the 6 transform tools. It can be quite time consuming having to go up to Edit, down to Transform and across to Warp every time you want to use the Warp tool, and there is a much quicker way of loading it. You'll need to select your image or document first by hitting Ctrl and A, and then hit Ctrl T, which will enter free transform mode. And you'll be given the option to select the warp tool up in the options bar using the warp toggle. Once you've loaded up the warp tool, you'll notice that the image has a mesh laid over the top of it, and this is what's known as the warp mesh. It consists of 9 segments, and when you move your cursor inside the mesh, you'll also notice that the shape of the cursor changes. Around the outside of the warp mesh, you'll see that there are corner handles in each of the 4 corners, and there's 8 control points, 2 on each edge, which show up as small circles. These can be dragged left, right, up or down to warp an image, or in this case our checkered document. The corner handles can also be dragged in any direction, and if you drag the corner handles inwards, you'll be able to see how the image starts to overlap itself. The other way of using the warp tool is to hold down with the mouse inside one of the 9 mesh segments. If I wanted to warp the center of this document, I can hold down and drag with the mouse, and you'll be able to see how it's starting to change shape. If at any stage you want to switch back to the free transform tool, deselect the warp toggle up in the options bar, and you can then make another transformation. Applying a warp or free transform couldn't be simpler. You can either click on the commit transform icon in the options bar, but the far easier option is to hit return on the keyboard. So now that we've taken a basic look at the warp tool and have seen how it can be controlled in Photoshop, let's see how it can be used to transform one of our images. On this month's CD, you'll also find another image called thamesrnli.jpg, and once you've found that, just select it, go down and click on Open, and then load it up into your version of Photoshop. Taking a look at the image, we can see that it's quite an impressive shot, with all the details contained in the frame, thanks to using a 15mm fisheye lens. The main problem, however, is the bridge that is spanning the Thames. It's suffering from barrel distortion, which I'm keen to remove, and we're going to do so using the warp tool. One of the great advantages of using the warp tool is that we can combine it with using selections. So if there's a specific area in a shot that you want to warp, like the bridge in this image, it makes the best choice. So the first thing that we need to do in this technique is we need to make sure that we can see our rulers clearly on our screen. And if you can't see yours, you can load them very quickly by hitting the shortcut which is Ctrl and R. It's worth making sure that your rulers are set to centimetres. So go up to Edit in the menu bar, scroll down to Preferences, move across, and then click on Units and Rulers. Under the Units, make sure your rulers are set to centimetres. And once you've done that, move across and hit OK. Zoom into the image a little by hitting Ctrl and plus, and then move across so you can see your vertical ruler. Pull out a vertical guideline and align this at 1 centimetre. We need to pull out a few further guidelines and set them at 9, 24 and 44 centimetres. So that's what I'm just going to do now. Once you've set your vertical guidelines to 1 centimetre, 9 centimetres, 24 centimetres and 44 centimetres, then you're ready to pull down a couple of horizontal guidelines. Pull down the first horizontal guideline and set this to 7 centimetres, and then go back up and pull down another and set this one to 10 centimetres. You can now zoom out a little bit by hitting Ctrl and minus and make sure that you can see the whole image. Move across into the toolbox and pick out the line tool. If you're struggling to find it, you may find that it's hiding underneath the rectangle tool. Once you've selected the line tool from the toolbox, move up into the options bar, make sure that it's set on shape layers, and type in a weight of around 15 pixels. We also need to change the colour, so just click on the colour to load up the colour picker and go for a nice bright pink colour. We're looking to draw a left to right diagonal line from our 10 centimetre guideline to our 7 centimetre guideline. So I'm just going to hold down on the edge of the 10 centimetre guideline and just drag this up to the top right corner of the 7 centimetre guideline. And as I release, you'll be able to see that you've now got a shape layer in your layers palette. Select your background layer, and then we need to temporarily hide the guides. So go up to View, down to Show, across, and then untick the tick alongside guides, and that will just temporarily hide them for the moment. Move over into the toolbox and pick out the lasso tool, and go into the options bar and then select New Selection and check that the feather is set to 0 pixels. We're looking to make a selection around the top half of this image. So just hold down with the lasso tool and just drag through the image, just selecting the top half of it. And we're also looking to select this boat over on the left hand side and that rowing boat, and then just join up your selection until you see the marching ants. We can load up the warp tool very quickly by first of all entering free transform mode by hitting Ctrl and T, and then moving up into the options bar and clicking on the warp toggle. You'll be able to see that the warp mesh is now on your screen, and it's only been applied to the area that we selected with the lasso tool. Heading on up into the options bar, you need to make sure that the reference point just to the left of the warp is set in the center, which it is, and then go across to the warp and make sure your warp is set to custom. Hold down with your mouse inside the central mesh segment, and what we're going to do is we're just going to drag this down a little bit so the bridge starts to fall in line with the coloured line that we created earlier with the line tool. It's quite a good idea if you want to be quite precise about it to zoom in. So I'm just going to hit Ctrl and plus, and I'm just going to make sure that the bridge is just hugging that pink line, and I can move through the image very quickly by holding down spacebar, which enters the hand tool. When you're happy that your bridge is now hugging the pink line, you can zoom out again by hitting Ctrl and minus. Now at the moment I'm just taking a quick look at the warp, and I can see here just on the right that the bridge isn't actually hugging the pink line. So I'm just going to zoom back in and just kind of refine and take a closer inspection. So again I'm just going to hit Ctrl and plus a couple of times, hold down on the space bar and just move across, and I'm just going to hold down inside this other mesh segment and just drag this down a little bit so the bridge is now hugging the line there. And whilst I'm zoomed in, I'm just going to move through and just check the rest of the bridge, and we can see here over on the left side that that's also just peaking a little bit above the pink line. So I'm just going to hold down inside the mesh segment again and just drag this down very slightly. Before we go ahead and apply this warp, it's very important that we check that the bridge pillars are remaining vertical. So we can load up those guidelines, those vertical guidelines that we created earlier. Head up to View, down to Show, Across, and then make sure that you've got a tick alongside Guides. Now the screen has got a lot of lines on it at the moment, and it might look a little bit confusing. But don't worry, we're just going to zoom in a little bit by hitting Ctrl and plus, and then we're just going to check that these bridge pillars are still in line and they're remaining vertical. If your bridge pillars don't look vertical, you can just hold down inside one of the mesh segments and just drag the image very carefully so the bridge pillars start to line up with the guidelines that we created earlier. When you're happy that the bridge pillars look vertical in your image, you can zoom out by hitting Ctrl and minus, or you can fit to screen by hitting Ctrl and 0. When you're happy with the warp, you can hit Enter to apply it, and then we can hit Ctrl and D to deselect those marching ants. It's also quite a good idea just to temporarily hide those guides. And you can do that by hitting Ctrl and the semicolon key, or of course you can go up to View, down to Show, and then untick Guides. Move into your Layers palette and select the Shape layer above your background layer. And we're actually all done with this shape layer now, so you can take hold of it and then just drag it down to the trash to delete it. Now I'm really pleased with what we've done with the warp tool, but if we look at the bridge section over on the right, it just looks a little bit too bulbous. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another selection and use the warp tool again. But I need to zoom in on this image first by hitting Ctrl and plus and then just scrolling across to the right hand section. Move into the toolbox and pick out the lasso tool and then make a selection around the right hand section of the bridge. So you can just see that I'm just drawing around the bridge, keeping it quite close to the bridge, and I'm just going to draw down and make sure I get these pillars in as well. And when you've got your selection, you can enter free transform mode by hitting Ctrl and T, and then move into the options bar and click on the warp toggle. With the warp mesh visible, take hold of the top center mesh segment and just pull this down very slightly. Once you've done that, move down to the bottom central mesh segment and just drag this up a little bit, and you'll be able to see how that bridge is just starting to look a little less bulbous. To apply the warp, we hit Enter, and then to deselect those marching ants, we hit Ctrl and D. Now you will have noticed that you've got these white edges above and below the bridge, but we can easily clone those out using Photoshop's Clone Stamp tool. So go across into the toolbox, pick out the Clone Stamp tool, and set up the brush in the options bar. Go for a soft brush of a size of around 80 pixels, make sure the mode is set to normal, and go for an opacity of around 100%. Hold down with the Alt key and then choose the pixels that you want to use for replacement, and then very carefully just start to brush over the white edge and just carefully take more sample points as you work your way along, and you'll be able to just work away that white edge very easily. It's going to take me a bit of time just to work all the way round, so I'm going to rejoin you in a few minutes once I've finished my cloning. So after a bit of time and care with the Clone Stamp tool, I've just carefully removed these white edges on the right hand section of the bridge. We're now ready to save the file. So go up to File and then down to Save As, and we need to give the file a new name. Once you've chosen where you want to save this warped image, give it a new name, and I've called mine RNLI warped.jpg, and then move across and click on Save. And there we have it. We've transformed our start image, and it now looks all the better for its more natural looking bridge that's spanning the Thames. I've pulled up both images side by side. The start image is over on the left, and the final image is down here on the right, to show you a comparison between before and after. Make sure that you give this technique a try for yourself to see how powerful and useful the warp tool can be. It's a really good tool to know about, and you never quite know when you're going to need it next. so once you know how to use it, you'll be able to rely on it time and time again. I hope you've enjoyed this month's masterclass video, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Bye for now.